as we get started here, when you are in the webinar, obviously you'll be able to see me, you'll be able to see the slides. If you have any questions from a Q&A perspective, feel free to use the Q&A portion. So there's two different communication platforms throughout this webinar. One is the Q&A and one is the chat. The chat is for any back and forth conversations or things like that that you want to have. Um, the Q&A is really helpful. If you have those questions, it helps log those questions and it doesn't get lost in the chat for me. So if you have a question throughout, feel free to ask questions throughout and type them into the Q&A function and ask your questions there. I'll try to monitor both the Q&A and the chat throughout, but it's definitely helpful if you can insert any questions into the Q&A section. I'll keep a monitor on those and see if I can answer questions throughout, and I'll try to leave some time at the end. But as people are funneling in here, I just wanted to take a moment and thank the AGS for providing this platform and for really investing into the members and the greater industry. So I think it's always clear that AGS does a phenomenal job of putting together things like Conclave and other educational opportunities for the industry. So I just wanted to take a minute and first thank the AGS team. They've been super responsive and really quick to act to find ways to create amazing opportunities for you all in the industry. And today is no exception. I hope to bring you as much value and content as I possibly can. So again, any types of questions, any types of information that you have, or any type of things that you want to bring up, you want me to go further on, feel free to ask those in the Q&A and I will address them. But let's dive into it. Today we're going to be talking about the core of what I think success, both digitally and non-digitally in a traditional setting, would be. And in these spaces, the core of that always goes back to brand and branding, right? Because you can have great messaging, but if it's not on brand, then it doesn't do anything to build that brand equity. You can have great content, you can have a great logo, you can have all the great different individual components, but if it doesn't build back into this all-inclusive, what we call master brand, then it doesn't really create this additive, what we call brand equity, right? So today we're going to talk about how to build a brand and what the anatomy of a phenomenal brand is. And we're going to go one step further into talking about this sort of paradigm that we call the human brand and the human brand sort of relationship and journey that brands are going on today. And in that relationship and across that spectrum, we're going to show you how to create a brand that's cherished by its customers, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So let's dive into it. My name is Ben Smithy. I'm the CEO of a company called the Smithy Group. We're a full-service digital marketing agency in the jewelry industry. About 70% of our business is in the jewelry industry. And we've had a chance to know, just as I've seen a lot of the participants coming in and stuff, to know a good portion of you. I know some of you, but I see a lot of new names and new faces too. So I'm excited. And thanks for taking the time to join today. This is where you can follow me online or get more information. If questions come to you after this webinar, shoot me a DM. You can go to our website, or at the end also have my email address. You can contact us via email as well. But right now, if you have your phones handy, which you do because everybody's at home, you can follow me on Instagram and follow our company on Instagram. And if you've ever reached out to us before, you know we're super responsive in those platforms and would love to chat with you. So again, thanks for taking the time to be here. I know that everybody's got a lot on their plates right now in terms of trying to figure out this sort of COVID-19 environment. But we're not going to directly just address that today. We're going to really talk about what I think one of the core things you could be using some of your focus and some of your time on right now, which is branding. What a lot of you may not know is that my background is actually not in the jewelry industry. It wasn't in the jewelry industry up until about 2011. I started a company back in 2009, and I was really building a company that was focused in the consumer market space, in the CPG space, and we did some of the very first, brand millennial brand builds, and really helped companies like some of these that you see here build brands focused on millennials, do some of the first stuff on digital and social, And in that space, that's where I really started learning like what is a great brand, what builds a great brand. When I fell into the jewelry industry in 2011, that's where we started focusing in on the jewelry industry. And then when I created TSG in 2014, we had a strong focus into the jewelry industry. But I want to make sure that people understand that this information is not coming just from a jewelry sort of vantage point. This is not coming from a jewelry specific mindset. This is coming from some of quite literally the biggest and most well-known brands around the world, and the processes and the steps and the things that we think about when we're developing brands for organizations like the ones that you've seen us work with here on this slide. But what makes a brand remarkable today? You know, what makes a brand something truly special? What makes it stand out from the crowd, right? What makes it unique and differentiated in this whole sea of sameness, as we call it? That's what we're going to really approach today. We're going to look at what can make your brand stand out from a sea of sameness across all of the other brands. In the CPG, which is the consumer packaged goods world, you can see that quite literally on the shelf, we would ask, you know, what makes your product stand out? What makes your brand stand out on the shelf? And many times we would call that the sea of sameness. When we do, you know, studies for snacks or things, you'd walk down and we do studies where we take consumers all across their shopping journey. And the only one thing we were keying in on is what their attitude was like when they walked down the chip aisle. And we'd watch them approach different bags of chips and different brands and how they would do that, or the milk aisle, or the bread aisle, or the bakery, any of those areas where we're looking at, okay, well, how does a brand stand out? How does a product stand out? And that's the goal of your brand, is really to say, how can you stand out from that sea of sameness? Today, we're going to accomplish a few things, and we're going to talk about these main categories, which are vision and values, brand persona, messaging, the visual identity, which is what a lot of people think about when we're talking about a brand, but it's not by any means, it's not the only thing. And then what do you do next? How do you execute on this? The first thing is vision and values, right? A brand starts with vision and values. And the reason why we do that is because if you can't communicate and you don't really have a strong vision and values, you're going to have a tough time communicating what that brand is and what the brand values and the brand messaging that all ties back to those things. So the first thing that we always do is start with why. Like, why do you exist? Why are you in business? What is your goal, right? What is your vision, right? But it always starts with why. And it goes back to, why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we exist? Why are we different? And why do consumers want to shop with us versus XYZ brand? Most of the brands that we see sort of lack that true vision. They may have a vision statement, they may have a mission statement, but really understanding that vision and how it communicates to the consumer market or their target customers is what a lot of brands struggle with today. And so therefore, if you can't connect the vision back to the brand, it's a hard time for them to really communicate the value that's tied back to vision. Quite simply, you need to be able to answer, I'm known for what? What am I known for? What are my values? What are the things that consumers know me for? Now, it's different from I want to be known for, right? Most people can answer the question of, I want to be known for X, Y, or Z. But it's a real heart check to understand, what am I actually known for? I want to be known for great prices and amazing customer service, and I want to be known for value, and I want to be known for all of these things. But do your customers and do the public at large see you as that? So it's a big question to always keep on the top of your mind, because it's a moving scale. A lot of times brands drift. A lot of times brands, change and evolve over time and over decades. There's a quote that I use a lot that is, vision leaks, right? The same thing is vision, value, all of these things leak over time. And we'll talk about the importance of that. But when you come back to it, you always have to be, from a brand perspective, always be able to answer, I am known for what? And it's a good practice for us to write down. And what's even better is to do research and understand what consumers and what your customers and what non-customers really know you as and what they know you for. When it comes to a brand persona, right, this is the core of it. Most people, when we talk about branding, and most of the time when we get on calls with a lot of small businesses and we start talking about branding, one of the first things that they start talking to us about is their logo and their brand mark and their colors and their messaging and their tagline and their motto. But when we're talking about a brand, it comes back to much more fundamental roots than just what we'll say the visual aesthetic or the visual identity. It comes back to brand persona. And developing your brand persona is a component of two things. It's a cross section and an intersection of two things. One, understanding who you are, and understanding your customer. Your brand persona is important to make sure that you can communicate who you are, and that ties in to who your customers are, because you have a brand persona and you have a customer persona that we'll talk about here, right? So when you're developing your brand persona, the things that we do is literally developing a person, a persona for your brand. It's very straightforward there. So what does your brand look like, right? If your brand was a person, is your brand the hip, young, energetic, 20 something? Is your brand a more experienced 50 something that is always bringing, experience and expertise and knowledge through experience and those things? Is it somewhere in the middle? What does your brand actually look like? When we do this exercise with brands, we're literally sometimes having them draw out, what does your brand look like? If your brand was a person, who would they be? What does your brand sound like, right? That means, what is their tone of voice? Is it formal? Is it casual? Is there humor involved? Is there not? Is it always serious? Is it always educational? Is there a lesson to be learned at the end of everything? Or is there a positive message? Or is it something that's just like cut dry to the point? Now, there's one thing to consider when you're thinking about all this, is that there's no right or wrong answer. The only right answer is do what fits you, and the only wrong answer is do what somebody else is doing just because they're doing it and they're succeeding, right? In order for your brand to be successful, you want your brand to sound like itself, right? It can't sound like somebody else's brand, but be your brand. So you have to understand, what does it sound like? So what does it look like? What does it sound like? How does it act, right? Is it engaging? Is it constantly in the community? Is it talking to other people? Is it outbound communication to other people? Or is it really more reserved and saying, here is our point, here's where we're going, and is it more authoritative in that space? Or is it more collaborative, right? All of these things, most small brands have not actually thought about. And we'll see how this sort of trickles down into messaging and everything else later. And then finally, like, if they were a person, who would they be, right? Who are their friends? Like, what kind of friends do they hang out with? How would they act at a party? Like, all of these different things. The more you can answer all of these questions, the easier it is to create messaging and respond with messaging and create other communications from a brand perspective. If you know how a brand looks, sounds, acts, feels, and what everything that they do, it's the same way if you're writing a character in a movie. Then it's easier to write their lines. It's easier to write their reactions. It's easier to script out and sketch out the storyboard for what they would do in this situation, because you know who they are as a person. And so it's important that if you're developing a brand that truly is cherished by consumers, they need to have an understanding of who that brand is as a person, that quote unquote brand persona. Now, this seems very rudimentary to some people, but the truth is, the majority of people on this call are probably not taking the efforts and the work to put in to really answer these questions. And I promise you, if you do this exercise, if you take and invest some time into doing these exercises, it's going to benefit you greatly. Even if you're the brand, even if the brand is your name, your person, your persona, your image, it's still important to do this, because it's important to know that how your brand will react or message to certain things, certain situations, responses, how it's going to act in these times. What it also does is allows you to put a stake in the ground, a true north for your team, which we'll talk about later too. Is super important to make sure that they're on board with being on brand. So it's important that you know where this is, so you can communicate it to the team. So now it doesn't become subjective. It's very objective. This is on brand. This is not on brand. This is, in alignment with our brand. This is not in alignment with our brand. And if it ties back to vision and values, now you're also saying these behaviors, these communications, these XYZ insert phrase here are aligned with our brand, or these are not aligned with our brand. Same thing with consumer and customer relations. What's on brand and what's not. If you have this fundamental foundational brand persona in place, it helps settle the score and the reaction time for many, many other elements later down the line. So again, there's two things. Once you do this for your brand persona, do this for your buyer persona, your customer persona. Who are my core customers? Some people do this for one core thing. Some people do it for their three best sort of customer personas. It'd be great to do sort of, especially in the jewelry industry, a male persona and a female persona. Maybe you have a male and a female in our engagement ring. You have a male and a female in our fine jewelry. You have a male and a female in our fashion jewelry. There's easily ways that you could communicate and create sort of 6 different brand personas, or excuse me, buyer personas, for those 6 different customer segments. And I'd encourage you to do so and go through the same diligence that you did on building out your brand persona to developing your buyer personas. It'll really help flesh things out for you. After you create those personas, after you create those sort of segments and those segments for your buyers, we call them customer segments, and then your brand persona for you, now you can get in and you can say, okay, how do I message? How do I create messaging that aligns with these things? Because if you start and jump right into messaging, then you don't really have a framework for who's delivering the message or how would that message be phrased or delivered, right? You only have opinions. And what happens if you worked with agencies, if you worked with creators or copywriters or videographers or even your team or customer service, how many times, and maybe we'll put this in the chat, type a number 2 if you've ever seen someone in your store, someone on your team, or seen, maybe an agency or someone that's speaking on behalf of the brand or behalf of you as the owner of the brand, send out messaging that's not necessarily aligned with how you would have wanted that phrase as the owner of the brand, right? If you've seen that, type in a number 2, right? And the truth is that, yeah, see, they're starting to flood in here. And it's a scary thing. As an owner myself, as a brand owner, and my name is associated with my brand, similar to all of you all, or many of you all, it's a scary thing to happen. And so what's important too is making sure that that messaging aligns with these things. And by having those fundamental brand personas and buyer personas in place, communicating them to your team efficiently and effectively, then you're able to associate the messaging accordingly. And so we're going to help first to solve for all those number 2s in the chat. If you're not telling your story today, someone else is. And I don't necessarily mean your competitor, but you're relying on the crowd to tell your story. Messaging and communication today, even though it's so much, it's so like accounted for in the digital space, right? All of our messaging is out there and it lives out there forever, essentially, right? Even though that it is so like written in digital stone, if you will, it's archived is the word I was looking for this whole time trying to search for the word. It's archived out there. If you're not the one creating it, messages get lost and hazy very, very quickly, right? So in that space, if you're not the one really clearly communicating that message over and over and over and over and over, you're leaving it up to your team to interpret the message, your customers to interpret the message, the greater public that's not your customer to interpret the message, to say what that message really was. That's why it's so key to continually expand upon your message and continually distribute your message from a branded persona in a way that is consistent and concise in the way that people can understand it. Your brand persona outlines the voice, but your messaging is the thing that has to be consistent to deliver it to the audience. Messaging in there considers a number of things, not only who you are, but it considers, the accent of where it's coming from, the dialect. It considers the pace. How often are we communicating? The tone, with what tone do we communicate? And it also considers the environment in which your audience consumes the content. A lot of us sit there and we really put a lot of thought into creating the message. We put a lot of thought into how the message is going to be, the persona, the messaging, the content, the copy, which hashtags we're going to use, which image we're going to use, and all of that. But how many of us actually consider where is the audience going to be when they consume this message? If this message is going out through Instagram, where's the audience going to be that's watching and watching this IGTV video? Where's this audience person going to be when they are consuming IG stories? Where are they going to be when they're reading this email? Where are they going to be when they're listening to this podcast? What are the things that are going to be at their disposal? What are the things that are not, right? Videos. Many people are watching videos while they're at a break at work or on the subway or in an Uber or in a passenger seat of a car, whatever that may be, right? And a lot of people are listening to video with audio off. So having subtitles, having things that give the audience cues, right? Understanding the environment that your audience lives in when they consume your messaging. That means, are they in an environment like this? Are they in an environment on a screen? What environment are they going to consume this message? Because now that dictates a lot of the ways in which you craft that message. And I think, again, it seems like a basic principle, but it's something that a lot of us don't consider when we're designing our brand messaging and when we're designing our brand and how we communicate with people is, okay, in what state of mind are they in there? Are they in a dreaming state? Are they in an education state? Are they in an entertainment state? Like, what set of mind frame are they in when they're consuming this content? And does it stay consistent across channels, but also adapt to whatever channel that it's in, right? We're in such a multi-channel world, right? We call it omni-channel, multi-channel. We're in such a diverse world of content that Pinterest looks different than Instagram, that looks different than Facebook, that looks different than email and text and your website. If we're not adapting that message to each of these channels, then how can we optimize each of these channels to their full extent? Now, if you're just getting going, there's some efficiencies and scalability that comes to using similar messaging across all of those things. I get that, right? And a message that's executed is better than not doing anything. But it can be optimized for each channel. And I challenge you this year is, how do you optimize each of your channels with the right messaging? And now we have sort of three types of messaging that we put things out there as: anchor content, supporting content, and micro content. And anchor content may be an email, it may be a blog, it may be a video, it may be an article, it may be a podcast. And then your supporting content pulls from that and supports that with an image that leads back to that link to the main piece of content and the main video. And then your micro content is an IG story or a tweet or a text message, something that leads back to supporting content that leads back to anchor content, right? We're going to use a consistent messaging. If we're talking about value in diamond selection, the value of diamond selection is going to be consistent across all of those messaging platforms. But the way in which we talk about that and the way in which we tease that and evoke excitement around that topic is going to be different in text versus email versus status update versus Instagram feed post versus story versus IGTV. And if you follow me on that, what you're seeing is there's a big nuance that has to happen. And it seems a little ridiculous to some people still that you put that much time in crafting an Instagram post or that much time in crafting a caption on an IG story. But it's truly fundamental to understanding how we optimize content for each of these channels. If you look at the people that have really, truly organically grown large followings and organically grown an influential community, in that space, they think about all of those little nuances. And it's important that as a brand, we do the same thing. Today's brands require, repetition and multiple touch points, right? So it's simple messaging. It's got to be action oriented. It should tell some sort of story and be memorable. And all of this ties together, right? Stories are more memorable because there's a lot of different actions that happen in a lot of simple different ways. The more simple we have something, the more memorable it is. The more action oriented it is, it tells the consumer the story of what they need to do next. All four of these components interplay with each other. So simple messaging, action oriented, tell a story, and be memorable. And then the visual identity piece of this. Visual identity is where a lot of people start, but it's really a result, I think, when we're developing a brand, we end on visual identity before we start with visual identity. Most people start with a logo and they say, okay, let's make a brand. But I think your logo should be reminiscent of what is representative of your brand, right? So today we have a visual economy, right? We are in the visual economy when it comes to media and marketing, and image is everything in a lot of ways. But authentic is often better than polished in the current situation that we're in, right? Having something that's authentic to your brand is better than something that's super, super polished and doesn't represent your brand well. So image in today's sort of digital economy is so important, but it's important to understand that unless your brand is everything super polished, everything super pristine, catalog, Vogue style editorial, don't try to be something that you're not, because it comes across as like this inconsistent approach to imagery and marketing and messaging. Excuse me. So the next piece of that is your imagery and your content should really understand the diversity of where things are at today, right? There's several different types of logos and image marks and brand marks and things like that. And they come into different categories. But remember, your logo today has to be used in a very, very, very diverse range of settings, right? It's used in a really tiny little circle on Instagram to be your profile image. It's used in square settings on Facebook. It's used in banners. It's used in vertical settings, stack settings, horizontal settings. So when you're thinking about your brand, when you're thinking about your visual identity, make sure that you have something that can be used in all of those varieties. So when we put together brand guidelines, when we put together visual guidelines for companies, we're thinking about all those things. When you're creating your logo, there's also things to consider. What type of logo do you want to have? There's some examples here when it comes to, Pepsi. They have a very abstract logo and identity mark, right? It's the waves. It's kind of a symbol of like a sail, if you will. And that's changed over the years. KFC is the mascot logo, right? They got the Colonel right there in their logo along with their brand acronym. That's the logo that they use because that mascot is symbolic of their history, their values, and who they are. You have combination, which is a logo, right? Burger King, it looks like a burger, but it also has the branding in there of the name, and it also has sort of that symbolic sort of swoosh on there. Um, Harvard, when you look at the emblem, it's their emblem. It's the history of the brand. It's their crest, right, on there. That Harvard's logo is. Right, that is their logo. Is they're using the history. It's straight up, boom, history. That's the thing that they're branded on. NASA, they straight up. It's an acronym, so they're using the letter mark, if you will. Apple, and a lot of times doesn't even use Apple. They just use the identity mark, and people know Apple because it's in the name, right? The name, excuse me, the name is in the image. And then Google is obviously a word, and they turn the word into the logo. It's the word mark is similar to like a letter mark, to where NASA, they're just changing the NASA, the A is looking like the tip of a rocket, obviously, and Google, where it's just the word that they're using as the image and the logo. There's a variety of things, and you can have multiple of these things, right? So as an abstract mark, Pepsi uses the abstract logo mark, but they also use Pepsi with the brand and the word on there, the word mark. You can have a variety of these different things, but I would encourage you that if your brand doesn't have a logo asset that matches and is as versatile as it needs to be in today's digital economy, to map all these, maybe you create some extra assets that supplement your core logo, that it can do better in email, do better in social, et cetera, et cetera. Because if you have this big, complex logo, as soon as you start shrinking it down as a watermark in an image or something like that, you lose all effectiveness of the logo and it just becomes clutter. So it's important to have that. Sometimes, for example, for this brand, for Marquette 6, we see sometimes it's used as a horizontal with the image, the identity mark stacked next to the word mark. Sometimes it's used just alone as the logo, as the abstract mark. It's a variety of ways that you're going to have to use it. So think about your own brand in this case. And now's a great time to start developing some of those assets if you need them. And packaging. When is the last time that you've thought about your packaging? When's the last time that you've thought about, is our packaging really representative of all of these other things that we just talked about? We talked about building our brand persona. If our brand persona is playful and engaging and approachable, and if it's all those things, attention to detail, it cares about the details, right? Detail oriented. If our brand persona is that, if our messaging communicates that, right? If our identity communicates that, does our packaging communicate that? Or is our packaging just a container, right? For some of us, for many of us, our packaging becomes just a container for the brand. We choose a good quality packaging because we want it to feel good to the consumers and our customers and our guests. But have we done anything to make sure that our packaging adds value to our brand, right? One of the greatest examples is the whole boxed water. I just love what they did. They rethought the complete idea of packaging when it comes to water. And a few businesses have done that. Voss has done that with the cylindrical glass bottle. Things like that really add value to your brand, add value, or is it something that is your packaging just an afterthought? And that's one of those sort of real questions that you can have with yourself, of saying, like, is our packaging just a bag in a box, or does it really do something to extend our brand one step further? Those are the differences between the brands that are excellent and the brands that just excel, right? They just get by, they just do something, they execute. But are they exemplary? And a lot of that comes down to the little nuances like packaging and logos and other different aspects of the brand that can expand the brand way across the market. And then finally, your store, right? Does your store image, does your online, your website image tell the story that you want to communicate? If you were to put your brand persona and you were to give your brand persona, the write up of your brand persona to a person, and they were to read that brand persona and they close their eyes and they envision what your store would look like, both online and in person, would they get the image that you have currently created for them? Or is there a big disconnect between the image that your store portrays versus the persona that you want it to portray? This is another one of those things that we need to think about. Now, I'm not saying that everybody can do a full store redesign or upgrade or things like that, but am I saying they should consider it? Yes. Are there other things that you can consider doing? Are there other areas that you can, revitalize? Are there different things that you can integrate into that experience that gives the feeling of your brand persona and brings it to life? But it's something that is part of our brand, and a lot of times in the luxury space, the unfortunate thing is we get to a point where everything is quality and luxury. And so if it meets a quality and luxurious threshold, we think it's on brand and we think that it fits the mold and it fits our brand because our brand is quality and luxury. But that's not the case. There's very many varieties of quality and luxury. If you go into an Hermes store, it's going to be very different than a Louis Vuitton store, which is very different than a Prada store, right? All three of those are luxurious brands. If you go into Chanel, it's going to feel very different than Prada, right? All of these brands are luxury brands, but their store concepts completely match the brand persona that's behind it. And I want us to take, that much detail to understanding if that is what we're communicating with our storefronts, both online and offline. So online is an important thing too. Does our website tell that story? Is it simple? Does it, all of those things? Just checking to see. Okay. And what's next? How do we execute on this, right? The first thing is setting standards, right? Your logo, your brand, your persona should all be set into parameters and standards that can be executed by your team, right? So you have to have brand guidelines. It's not just something for your designers, it's something for your team to understand, right? As your team starts being more digital and they start posting on social, they use your logo, they use your typefaces, they use your fonts, they use your messaging. They need to understand who your brand persona is. They need to understand, because otherwise they're going to communicate from their brand persona, which is their personal persona, which can be great and sometimes to add context, but you don't want it to be the foundation. You want your brand to be the foundation. You want their person to be the foundation and the context to add on to that foundation. So make sure your employees understand the brand persona. Make sure they understand brand guidelines, right? That's not just visually and a visual identity, but also everything from messaging. We do say this, we don't say that. We do say, XYZ when it comes to the different characteristics of diamonds. We don't say these words. It's also helped to protect them from things that we have to say for FTC guidelines and all of that type of stuff. And everyone's responsible for the message and the brand. I can't stress this enough. From your lowest entry-level employee to the owner of the brand, to your agencies, to whomever that is, everyone is responsible for the messaging. Everyone is responsible for your brand. And so do you train your team on your messaging regularly, right? First of all, are you having those 15-minute meetings every day with your team? Are you having those touch points where you can reinforce vision, values, core beliefs, brand persona, all of these different things, sales training, all of those different pieces? And if you are you reinforcing the brand, right? Over decades and decades of time, and it doesn't take that long at all. It can take weeks sometimes. That brand gets diluted in their minds because they're thinking of everything else at their fingertips, not thinking about the thing that needs to be in their head and their heart at the time, right? So it's important to go back to those areas and reinforce brand, reinforce messaging, reinforce all of those attributes that we talked about before, because that will trickle down into their sales conversations. That will trickle down into their scripts. That will trickle down into their clienteling, all of those different pieces, and help them execute better and help reinforce and build a stronger brand across everything versus slowly diminish away and take away and eat away at the brand that you've worked so hard to build and craft. So what about the cherish part? What do I mean when I say a cherished brand? Well, the modern business today is a holistic business that starts with people, leadership, and team. And strategies and tactics and things fit those various demands and needs. And it focuses on where businesses are going, not where it's been. But it requires a new mindset. And consumers are facing a new mindset when they're thinking about brands. And one of the things that it's requiring is brands to think in different ways and consumers to be exposed to different ways that brands are creating experiences and nuances and thinking about consumers in a totally different way. And once consumers are exposed to it, they're never going to go back to the old way. And this is what we're talking about, the human brand. And we all know that, you can't put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube, right? So once consumers are exposed to this new human brand, once consumers are exposed to this heightened level of humanity from brands, there's no going back. We're not going to go sort of retrograde and go back and retrofit consumer expectations. And the commonality here is human, right? Human brands are the future. And what do I mean by a human brand? A human brand is a brand that's not just this polished sort of logo and trademark and everything that we've talked about, but the people behind it, the people that exemplify that brand on a daily basis. And it's so important that we're thinking about the human elements of a brand as much as we're thinking about the data points. We spend a lot of time thinking about analytics and data points and, AI and automated marketing and all of these different things. Customer segmentation and clicks and impressions and reach and ROAS and all of these different data points. But consumers are not data points, they're humans. So if we don't infuse a level of humanity from the brand standpoint, we're going to quickly find that our brand no longer meets the expectations from the consumer market because brands are moving in a much more human way. And there is this relationship journey, there is this relational journey that brands go in. And we're going to talk about that. And it goes from existing to being discovered to favored to consumed to demanded to cherished. And we're going to walk through these pieces. But there's a big difference right when we get to the separation between a brand that's consumed into the final two phases, 5 and 6, of brands that are demanded and cherished. The first one is exist. All of you exist. All of you have businesses here, unless some of you are looking to start your business that are on this webinar. But brands exist, but do you exist in the places that are supposed to be, that are going to be, discovered and favored by consumers? So do you exist online? It used to be that if you didn't have a website, you didn't exist. It used to be that if Google can't find you, you don't exist. Now it's if, Instagram and Facebook and potentially Snapchat or TikTok or all these other things can't find you, you don't exist. But right now, do you exist where the grand majority of your potential customers exist as well, right? So if they have a presence in these spaces, do you have a presence in these spaces? Most brands are great at existing, but you need to understand, where do your target customers go for education? Where do they go to get excited? Where do they go to dream? Where do they go to be entertained? Where do they go for emotional relief? All of these different pieces. And if you understand where they go to seek all these outlets, that's where you need to exist in order to be discovered. After you exist, the greater thing is to be discovered. And this is where you're seeing a big dichotomy between search ads and display ads versus social ads, right? A lot of consumers are moving past the point where they want to search for really nothing at all, right? Most of us on this webinar are not fans of having to search for something, because that means that we don't have an answer at our fingertips already. We don't have a suggestion. We don't have a favored suggestion. We don't have something that is already our go-to for a situation or a solution. So therefore, we're forced to search for it. So discovery is way more appetizing to us. What happens is when we have bad discovery, where something discovers us that we don't want to. But discovery is important. And we need to understand a couple things, right? Mostly today, if you're doing social well, a brand or a person is going to discover your brand before they search for it, right? A new person that's never done business with you. And so what does that mean? You need to understand, how is a consumer going to first meet your brand? And what is their mindset? What's the situation of the environment? What's the emotion that they're going to be in when they first meet your brand online? How educated about your product and about your brand are they going to be when they first discover your first piece of content? For many of you, they're not going to be super educated. If you're trying to reach and expand your market and not just reach your current customers, when that customer first sees your piece of content, they may or may not know about you already. So you need to understand what is their level of knowledge about your brand when they discover you. Most brands are getting to this point where, they're discovered. They're discovered online, they're starting to be in the space, and that's great. In today's economy, in today's world, in today's digital environment, it's likely that consumers will favor your brand before they ever consume it. We all have at least one brand that we favor, that we like, that we follow, that we consume their content, right? That we haven't consumed their brand yet. We haven't purchased something from them. We follow them. We're looking at it. We're interested, but we haven't ever purchased or consumed anything officially, monetarily from them. So, as a brand in the luxury space, as a brand in the fine goods space, it's important that you understand that many consumers will favor you before they ever consume something from your brand. So, what does that mean? That means that we need to think like media companies, and how our media is perceived is just as important as anything else that we do in our marketing or in our branding or anything that we do as a store, right? Because the purchase experience is super important, but there's many things that lead up to that actually happening. And so if we're not thinking about the situation where a consumer is favoring our brand before they actually consume something from us or buy something from us, then we're missing out on a very important pivot point. Now, this next phase is where most of us are really good at getting to. We can all sell things. We're good at getting people up into this point. We may have skipped over the discovered. We may have skipped over the favored part, and maybe they searched for us. We had what they needed, and they consumed something from us. Great. However you got here, great. You're going to set yourself up for even greater success if you did steps 1, 2, and 3 in order when they get here to 4. It'll set you up better for 5 and 6. But regardless, if you get to 4, you're in business. You're making money. You're selling things. But what happens after the consumption phase, right? How do we meet their needs as a human, as well as their product needs that they're looking for? What is the post-sale experience? Many people have a very, very unbalanced approach to pre-sale and post-sale experience. Most of us focus all of our time in how do we get to the sale, but very few brands focus on what happens after that sale. What is the post-consumption experience? What is the clienteling experience for after that purchase has happened? So I'd encourage you to look at part of your brand extension to being after that sales experience. What are we really doing to act like a human after we've sold that? After we don't need anything from them again, right? So they purchased it, right? At that moment, we don't need anything from them. We got the money, we got the relationship, we got whatever we need. What am I doing to reinforce that to lead to the next sale, the repeat purchase, the next anniversary, the next birthday, the next amazing memory or moment, right? So focus on that post-sale, post-consumption experience as well. But here's the future. These next 2 phases are where the brands that are really loved, the brands that are really cherished, the brands that are really going to last generationally do this well. The next thing is demanded, right? How do you move from a brand that's consumed to a brand that's truly demanded? Meaning, how does a brand not only execute on its promise, but does it so repeatedly that consumers will demand that experience above any other alternatives? Meaning, when I need XYZ, when I have XYZ need, when I have a birthday need, when I have an anniversary need, when I have a gift need, when I have a special occasion, I demand that I'm going to XYZ Jewelers first. This is my first step. This is my first solution. This is my first choice for a solution to my problem, right? Whether I need a gift to celebrate something, to celebrate a person or celebrate an experience or a milestone, I know that I am going first to XYZ Jewelers or to XYZ brand, and this is the experience that I'm demanding first. Only if this is not available, only if this cannot fit my needs or solve for my problems, will I go somewhere else for this. That's a level that we can become if we execute often and repeatedly on these things, and our experience and our brand delivery is so high that people will start demanding us before they'll choose or settle for something else. Now, many of us will get to this point, and many of us we have the top 25, the top 100 customers that probably feel like this about our brand or our company or whatever it is, right? Meaning that these 100 people, they always come to us first. Great. How do you make everyone feel that way? How do you make sure that you are the demanded brand for anyone that purchases from you? The experience is so great. The brand experience is so great that they want to come back and that they demand to come back and that you are first on their list for solutions. The last phase, and where it's really, really important, is cherished, right? Few brands really reach this point, and only a customer only has a few brands that really qualify for this status, which is a cherished brands. And those cherished brands have this, what we call a symbiotic relationship with their customers, right? Where customers are not only advocates of the brand, but they're blatant promoters of the brand. Their life would be different if you didn't exist. These are cherished brands. Everybody can think about right now that would be, their life would be pretty different if XYZ brand or product didn't exist. Some of us are experiencing that because we don't have access to our favorite restaurant, or we don't have access to our favorite gym, or we don't have access to our favorite place or our favorite people, right? Cherished relationships. So in your life, you have these things that are cherished. And businesses today, the human brands, and only if you become a human brand, right, and have humanity behind your brand, will you ever be able to get to this last stage that we're studying, which is the cherished stage. How would customers feel if they didn't have your brand, or if your brand no longer existed? That's what you want to understand. Because if you're not impacting people at that level, if you can get to that level, if you can get to that level as a human brand, then you've won the game. Now you've created such a symbiotic relationship with your customers that you're a cherished brand. And those customers will do anything to not only spread and advocate for your brand, they know your brand promise, they know your brand persona, they're saying it to all their friends, but not only will they advocate for you in that way, they'll also stick up for you if anybody criticizes it. They're the people that always have your back. They're the people that are probably reached out to see how you're doing during these times right now, even though they're not family, they're customers. But you've helped them so many times, and you've helped solve for so many problems in their life, and you've helped symbolize and celebrate so many memories in their lives that they cherish your brand. They cherish that relationship. We all have those customers. We all have those brands as customers that we cherish. But I want us to all understand that if we start with the very first slide that we talked about, and we do these things well, we can get more customers to think of us as a cherished brand. And that's my goal for you all. That's my goal, is to help you all become cherished brands, to think like that. But in order to actually become those, we have to understand those components of it. And that's what I really wanted to share today. I do want to leave time for questions and answers. If somebody wants to take the slide, that's fine too. But also, we just released a new resource this year that is a free TSG marketing guide. If you just go to this link, the link is case sensitive, so the TSG has to be capital. So go to bit.ly/capital TSG marketing guide. You can download that marketing guide. And if you download that marketing guide, it has a lot of information in there. It's free to you. It's from all of our team. We picked 10 of our top 10 things that we're seeing most common in today's thing. My opening letter in there is about the human brand. But I want to open it up for questions. I'll leave it back here. Sorry, someone. If you have questions about this, if you need any questions about this, just shoot me an email. I want to leave this up for questions. Sorry, I got the hiccups. But if you email hello@thesmithygroup.com and you just say slides from AGS presentation, I'll make sure that you get all of the slides from today if you want the slides. So just email hello@thesmithygroup.com, put slides in the, put AGS slides in the subject line, and I will email you a full PDF of these slides so you have them in case you miss things on notes. But as of right now, if there's comments, you can put them into the chat. You can ask questions in the Q&A. But I also wanted to just thank you all for taking the time to be here, and thank you to the AGS team for providing such a great platform for both members and non-members alike for this webinar, to help really reinforce their care for the industry, their care for you as members of this industry, and to look out for more resources. I believe there's more happening very, very soon. I think you can look at the AGS communications, and they will make sure that they keep you up to date with the webinar schedule. I believe John Carter's coming up with the next one, is next in line for this series as well. So you won't want to miss that. Obviously, everybody, if you're AGS, you know who John Carter is. And so I would definitely say reach out with any questions that you have. If you have questions now, I'll pull them up. Yep. So that was just Carter saying, yes, he's next. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, chat them in. Our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, the major online platforms right now. Yes. That said, there's two or three platforms that are always overlooked because we're thinking about social as platforms. So Andrew, one of the things I would say is don't forget a blog or an online piece of content, right? Don't forget YouTube, and don't forget a podcast platform. Podcasts are so big right now, and they're still very, very valuable. And voice is something that a lot of us can do. You can record it. You have a perfectly great voice recorder right here on your phone. You can get fancy and buy a microphone. You can get an external mic. There's a lot of solutions there, but honestly, you could create a great podcast with great content from your phone. There's a lot of resources for that, but don't forget that YouTube and your blog, using YouTube to host video. When I talk about YouTube, I mean YouTube as a platform, but also as just a video host. So don't forget your blog and email are also very powerful platforms right now. But yes, I'd say right now for jewelers, we're still seeing great return, even more so right now during all of this. Instagram is crushing it when it comes to online ads. The cost per clicks are still way down. You can get a lot of a bang for your buck if you're open, if you can ship. All that is great. But even if not, if you just want to build brand and build brand equity and tell stories and narrative and all this stuff to really build a strong brand presence, Instagram ads are crushing it right now. Facebook and Instagram are the two biggest still by far in terms of brand equity. TikTok is great. You have to be a little bit better at content creation. There's not a really good ad platform. They do have an ad platform, but because TikTok requires so little information for the registration process, the ad targeting on there is very, very generic. It's not super sophisticated yet. Eventually, some other platform will scoop it up and they'll get access to all the backend data and cross-reference platforms, and TikTok will have a crazy ad platform too. Excellent. All right, everyone. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Again, I believe AGS will potentially make these available afterward. But if not, I'll get you the slides. I'll get you the information. Feel free to reach out via email. You can always email me directly. Mine is just ben@thesmithygroup.com. And we'll see you next time. Thank you all. Hope everybody stays safe and healthy. And just hope you guys have a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week. And reach out if there's anything I can do to help you out. I'll promise I'll do whatever I can to help you guys out during this time. And just thank you again to the AGS. You guys are awesome. You always help and you always provide great content. And I'm just very, very blessed and thankful to be a part of it. Thank you guys. Have a great day.